The story of the Sun Gym Gang from Miami became known to the general public because of director Michael Bay, who saw its adventures as cinematic and made the black comedy pain gain. The slogan of the movie was the phrase, "Their American dream is bigger than yours." The gang committed only 2 serious crimes, but they were so audacious that this story really deserves a close look. The founder of the Sun Gym Gang was Daniel Lugo, born in 1963 in New York City. The path to crime came as a complete surprise to those who knew this diligent student and athlete from childhood. The first 20 years of Lugo's life serve as a rather familiar illustration of how a boy from a dysfunctional family makes his way in life, studies hard, plays soccer, enters university, and begins to study a promising profession. Daniel really had a hard time growing up. His father drank heavily and kept the boy and his sister in constant fear. The main care for the upbringing of the children was taken on by his mother. Lugo went to school in Midtown Manhattan, where he spent his childhood and adolescence. There he showed good sports results and played on the Xavier High School soccer team. The guy did not break laws, did not drink, and was not seen in the use of drugs. He persistently moved forward to the American dream with a good job, a big house, a beautiful wife, and a lot of children. In 1981, Lugo graduated from high school and went to study at Fordham University in New York City. There he began to study computer science. The boy showed success in his studies. He was paid a scholarship, was considered a promising student, and was accepted into the main body of the university soccer team. Even in his relationship with his father, Daniel showed himself as befitting a good son. When he fell ill with cancer, Daniel was the only member of the family who cared for him. In 1985, Lugo suddenly became disillusioned with his studies, started skipping classes, and left the university, although he was already close to graduation. Soon he got a job in one of the fitness clubs in Manhattan, where he met Lillian Torres. She worked there, and in 1987 became Daniel's wife. In 1988, the couple left for Florida, where Lillian's relatives lived. Lugo in the new place again got a job as a fitness trainer, and Torres had to take custody of the 3 children of her sister, who died of AIDS. Money became catastrophically scarce, and Daniel decided to break the law for the first time. He chose to start with a relatively innocuous scam. In the local newspaper, the Miami Herald, Lugo read advertisements for several small and medium-sized entrepreneurs who were looking for investors to realize their ideas. Daniel decided to pretend to be a representative of a Hong Kong bank interested in investing in American businesses. He called himself David Lowenstein, prepared persuasive speeches, dressed smartly, and launched the simplest scheme of deception. He collected advance payments for loan insurance, which, of course, no one was going to provide. So Lugo first embezzled $71,000 from local businessmen, and then traveled to Oklahoma, and from there brought back $23,000. In May 1990, he was arrested and soon sentenced to 15 months. Daniel pleaded guilty and served his time in a Florida prison. After his return to freedom, Lugo left his wife but continued to coach. He met John Meese, an old bodybuilder and owner of the Sun Gym Fitness Club. He had won the title of Mr. United Kingdom in Britain back in 1962 and dreamed of creating a cult gym for jocks in Miami. Miz wasn't new to the business, but things weren't going well with fitness. There weren't enough customers, and the ones that were available easily missed the membership fees. Club managers stole money, were caught in possession of drugs, and one even committed a triple murder. A steady flow of profits to such establishments is given by ordinary people with beer bellies, but they were scared off by the semi-criminal regulars of Sun Gym, fanatically pulling iron and experimenting with drugs. In 1992, the club was on the verge of closing, but then Daniel showed up with his fountain of business development ideas. Miz knew about Lugo's criminal background, but he trusted him to run the business, and it really took off. Daniel not only coached, but also implemented new software at the club to automate accounting and track membership dues. This is where his uncompleted university education helped him. By mid-1994, Sun Gym had become a popular institution and was seriously undercutting its competitors. Around the same time, the backbone of the eponymous gang began to form. Lugo was personally trained at Sun Gym by Jorge Delgado, whose business partner was Mark Schiller. He was the first victim. Delgado and Schiller pulled off a pretty good scam together to steal from the U.S. budget. Schiller had access to the personal data of citizens of the country, which allowed the accomplices to forge documents for submission to the federal healthcare program Medicare. Well, the state already transferred money for the allegedly rendered medical services. Delgado and Schiller's earnings from this scheme alone amounted to hundreds of thousands of dollars over several years. Lugo also wanted to get involved in such an interesting process, but there was no cooperation. Moreover, Daniel convinced Jorge that Mark had underpaid him $200,000. The gift of persuasion is one of the main qualities of crime bosses, and Lugo had it perfectly. He not only broke up former partners in a dangerous business, but also convinced Delgado to force Schiller to pay his debts. The plan was to do it by kidnapping him. Lugo enlisted 3 other players in the case: Noel Durbel, another Sun Gym personal trainer Stevenson Pierre, who also worked at the fitness club, and Carl Weeks, Pierre's cousin. The accomplices were offered $100,000 each as risk compensation. None of the gang members had any serious experience of violent crime, so the kidnapping was indeed a comedy at first. His first 7 attempts failed, and the victim could only be forced into the van on the 8th time. Schiller was locked up and tortured for days until he began to sign over his possessions and money to the kidnappers. Among other things, Mark's restaurant, his huge house, and more than $1 million sent to the account of a company registered to Lugo and Misa became the prey of the bandits. They decided to kill Schiller, who had given away his earnings, by making it look like an accident. For this purpose, the victim was forcefully drunk for 3 days, after which they put him in a car and drove it into a pole. Mark was unconscious from the impact, but did not die, so the car was doused with gasoline and set on fire. Schiller woke up and got out, at which point they decided to just run him over. The bandits were spooked by another car, so they dumped their unkilled victim and sped off. Schiller survived and went to the hospital. Lugo and his accomplices tried to get him here, but Mark escaped death again, managed to move to New York, and hired a private investigator there to recover property and money. A month after the January 1995 incident, Daniel decided that Schiller was scared enough to try to return to Florida to punish the criminals. He moved into his house and introduced himself to the neighbors as a U.S. intelligence officer looking after the building after it had been seized and the former owner deported. In March 1995, Durbel told gang members about a new potential victim, Frank Grigg. He learned about him from his friend and dancer Beatrice Weiland, who knew the young millionaire. Grigg was developing his company in what we briefly call phone sex. He also had a nice house and a fleet of expensive sports cars, and a girlfriend, Christina Furton, whom he took everywhere with him. They decided to work with Grigg according to the same scheme to kidnap and shake out everything of value. Lugo once again played the role of a successful businessman, convincing Grigg to have phone sex with him in India. One of the meetings from discussing business plans turned into a trip to Durbel's home, where Grigg and his girlfriend were attacked. The kidnapping got out of control because Frank began to resist desperately and was strangled. Christine was knocked out with injections of a pre-prepared horse tranquilizer, and after several injections, the 23-year-old died as well. The corpses were dismembered, sealed in barrels, taken outside the city and drowned in a shallow canal. The jewelry and credit cards removed from the dead were dumped in a bag downtown to confuse police. The traces of the crime were not well covered, so on June 3, 1995, Delgado and Durbel were arrested. Things were found in their homes that clearly indicated involvement in both the double murder and the Schiller kidnapping. On June 8, Daniel Lugo was arrested in the Bahamas. against whom even his then-girlfriend Sabrina Petrescu testified. She knew something about the murders and even helped hide the traces, so the police persuaded her to testify against Daniel to avoid prison herself. Delgado, Pierre, and Weeks also made a plea bargain and completely surrendered Lugo and Durbala. For this, the three were not given life imprisonment. The outcome of the gang's adventures, according to the court, was as follows: Daniel Lugo death penalty, Noel Durbal death penalty, John Mies 56 years in prison, Jorge Delgado 15 years in prison, Carl Weeks 10 years in prison, Stevenson Pierre 7 years in prison, 7 years in prison. The gang trial was the longest and most expensive in the history of Miami's Dade County. It involved the examination of 98 witnesses and the presentation of more than 1,200 exhibits. John Mies died in prison from a stroke in 2004. Durbal was able to get his death sentence overturned in 2017 due to changes in the law. Delgado was able to be released early in 2002 and received probation in 2008 for grand larceny. Daniel Lugo made several attempts in prison to appeal to the authorities to overturn his death sentence and send the case back to court for a new trial. Unlike Durbal, he was unsuccessful in getting relief. Lugo is still alive, imprisoned in Florida, and has not given up trying to overturn his sentence.